All rise for the national anthem. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our 2020 Veterans Day program at West Marshall High School. As you know, 2020 seems like a country song. You know what you get when you listen to country music backwards? You get your wife back, you get your trailer back, and you get your dog back. It all started out with Australia on fire, a strange thing called COVID-19, the even stranger introduction of Zoom meetings, virtual graduations, virtual weddings, and even virtual doctor visits, political ads, social unrest, and a derecho. Enter August. Are we having school or are we not having school? Mask or no mask? Hybrid learning or in-class learning? And tomorrow, who knows what that looks like? As the story rolled out, we started school, we are here, we are learning, and now it is one of the most important days of the year at West Marshall, Veterans Day. The day that we take a moment to honor our area veterans on this most important day. To have this day, we had to make this a live stream event for our community members. To our patrons who are watching at home, thank you for your support, and hopefully someday soon, we'll all be able to meet in person. So let's let those people people that are at home know that we're here. So let's give them a round of applause, and thank you for joining us. No matter the branch served, whether the job path or how many years served, raising your hand and committing yourself to service in the military was a brave and selfless act. One that resulted in few guarantees of where you would be assigned, whether you might be deployed, and in some cases, if you would return home. Thanks to those who have served and those who continue to serve today, America can sleep peacefully at night. Military men and women know the risk, but they accept them in the cases so that we don't have to. Before we start our program, I'd like to mention some of our staff members and their connections to the military. I will start with Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Ferguson was in the Army Guard for 12 years and the Air Guard for 16 years for a total of 28 years of military service. Mr. Ferguson started teaching at West Marshall in 2000, and while in the Guard, he was deployed from 2005 to 2006 in Iraq. He never makes mention of his service, and most would not realize the type of danger he was in as he was deployed, driving trucks and transporting goods in hostile enemy territory, dodging road mines and snipers. Mr. Ferguson missed an entire year of school while serving his country. At that time he was deployed, his children were 6 and 4. Mr. Ferguson retired from the National Guard in 2014 from his service. Let us give Mr. Ferguson a warm round of applause for his service. Mrs. husband, Chris, grew up in Marshalltown and after high school joined the United States Army. He spent 5 years on active duty in the Army and earned the rank of Staff Sergeant. His tours included the 3rd U.S. U.S. Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard in Fort Myer, Virginia, and the 130th Attack Battalion in Iraq. Chris was in Iraq for 10 months, and his main job in Iraq was communications. Upon completion of his military service, Chris received his undergraduate degree from Iowa State University in 2012 and graduated from the University of Iowa College of Law with distinction in 2015. Currently, Christopher Wurzberger is an attorney in the Grinnell area. Let us give Mr. Wurzberger a round of applause for his service. Thompson's husband, Tanner Thompson, joined the Army National Guard in 2009 when he was a junior at Gladbrook Rhinebeck High School. His job is an 88 Mike, which is a truck driver, and gained the rank as a sergeant in 2015. He is currently the leader of the gun truck squad in his unit. Tanner graduated with a bachelor's degree in natural resource management from Upper Iowa University. Let us give Mrs. Thompson a round of applause for Tanner Thompson's service. Now introduce to you our special guests today. Our guests are very important today as they are the parents and grandparents of 4 of our 2021 seniors. In addition, we'll honor Mr. Chuck Rossiker, who is currently teaching business at West Marshall. I learned last week that Mr. Rossiker was a veteran and did not want to miss this opportunity to honor his service. Mr. Chuck Rossiker graduated from Richland Heartland School in southern Minnesota. Like all young men who are 18, Chuck had to register for the draft in those days. In those days, if your number was called for the draft, you had to enlist in the service. Chuck's number did not come up for the draft, so he decided to go to trade school. At the time, Minnesota offered free tuition to trade schools for students who were graduates to age 21. Chuck enrolled in a drafting program. He had started the program, and after a semester, his girlfriend at the time had 2 brothers who were in the Marines. These brothers encouraged him to go to the service. Chuck took the advice of the brothers, and he may or may not have joined because he wanted to be in the good graces of these brothers. And it was 1972. The Vietnam War was still going on, and there was much conflict in the world. Chuck had a brother who was 12 years older. Chuck and his brother both served during the Vietnam era. Chuck's brother served from 1962 to 1963. During Chuck's time in Korea, Vietnam troops were being pulled out of Vietnam and President Nixon resigned. Chuck notes the poor treatment that Vietnam soldiers received upon their arrival at home. Chuck also notes that the first time that his brother was ever recognized for his service was when Chuck purchased a plaque for him that recognized him as a veteran of the Vietnam War at Christmas. At the time, Chuck's brother was 75 and told Chuck that he was going to bring it to work to show his coworkers. And I don't know Chuck's brother, but you gotta like a guy who's 75 years old and still goes to work every day. Chuck's brother, like many Vietnam-era veterans, rarely speak of their experiences. Chuck told me that if you think there is political unrest in this country today, that in those times the political and social unrest of the Vietnam era was much worse and very troubling. He was very ashamed of the treatment of soldiers returning from Vietnam upon their arrival on American soil. Chuck was also surprised that West Marshall has a program like this one that we are having today, and thinks that this is a very positive thing for our students. The Army calls its job military occupational specialties. Each of the MOS requires advanced individual training and specialization. Army jobs can be divided into 2 basic categories: those who participate in combat missions and those that support the soldiers who are in combat. Chuck decided that he wanted to be a clerk typist. As he took the aptitude test, an officer asked him if he'd be interested in being a possible candidate for West Point. He took the test and did not do well enough on the math and decided that he did not want to be an officer. Chuck completed his basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and then was stationed in Seoul, Korea as a protocol officer. In his position as protocol officer, Chuck processed 1 through 4-star generals to move in and out of the country. He organized events and was part of the 8th Army United Nations Command. The 8th Army is a United States Field Army which is in commanding formation of all the United States Army forces in South Korea. It commands U.S. and South Korean units and is headquartered at Seoul, Korea. The 8th Army also works works with the United Nations to keep a watchful eye on North Korea, as North Korea was a threat to national security in the 70s, and as you know, today North Korea remains a major threat to the United States today. Before going to Korea, Chuck learned that his sister died shortly after giving birth to her 4th child. He had to break the news to his parents, which was one of the worst experiences of his life. She left 4 children behind, and his war story of a friend that left way too soon was his sister. Chuck enjoyed his time in Korea and decided that he was going to make the best of his time there and wanted to learn about the culture and the people. He believes that the experience was an enriching experience and that upon his return, his buddy noted that he had grown up and matured. When he got back home to Minnesota, he went back to trade school. After trade school, he went to work for Fisher Controls in Marshalltown. He worked for 29 3/4 years, 20 years as a draftman, 10 years in project management, customer service, and quality control. Chuck has 4 children, Tina, Jason, Autumn, and Brooke. Autumn and Brooke are graduates of GMG, and his wife, Dana, is here today. Dana and Chuck have been married for 27 years. And as the world sometimes works, Chuck's niece, who was the baby of his sister who died, introduced Chuck and Dana in Marshalltown at a singles dance. Dana was the only young lady at this dance. All the other ladies at the dance were old. And as sometimes things work out, Dana even had a date. But because of his niece, he was introduced to his wife, and the rest is history. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm round of applause for Mr. Chuck Rossiker. Our next honored guest is Deputy William Parker, the father of Caitlin Parker, a senior at West Marshall. William grew up in a suburb of Paterson, New Jersey, which is about 20 miles west of New York City. William attended a private high school in Paterson, which is a densely populated and diverse area. In fact, if you've ever seen the movie Lean on Me with Morgan Freeman, William took his SAT at the inner city school that the story is based upon. William had great hopes of attending the United States Military Academy in West Point, New York. He was conventionally nominated, passed the physical exam and fitness test, but fell a bit short academically to ensure his admission to the academy. It is important to note that 1/2 of 1% of the population in the United States gains admission to West Point. Even though William was deeply disappointed about West Point, he believes that God had a different plan and purpose for his life. After high school, William decided to go to college. He attended college for 3 semesters at Pensacola Christian College in Pensacola, Florida. He decided that college wasn't for him and followed his heart by joining the United States Army. He was 20 years old and was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He was the airborne infantry soldier, the 82nd Airborne Division, a trained paratrooper. In 1991, the United States was concerned about the safety of Saudi Arabia and other countries in the area of the Middle East. Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq at the time, had intentions to invade and control the oil reserves in the area. As a result, President George H.W. Bush deployed over 500,000 United States troops to the region to help protect Saudi Arabia from possible Iraqi invasion. This operation was called Desert Shield. The United States sent additional troops in Operation Desert Storm with more than 100,000 Saudi troops to form a U.S.-Saudi Army allegiance, along with troops from other allied countries, to attack Iraqi troops in Kuwait and to stop further invasion. During Operation Desert Storm, Iraqi troops were defeated within 4 days, causing the Iraqis to retreat. William served a tour of 6 months in Saudi Arabia on a security mission and was assigned the U.S. Patriot Missile Group. The Patriot missile is designed to detect, target, and then hit an incoming missile that may be more than 10 to 20 feet long and is typically flying at 3 to 5 times the speed of light. The Patriot system can also destroy incoming aircraft and cruise missiles. The Patriot missile system has been deployed in many situations because its ability to shoot down missiles and protect soldiers and civilians from missile attacks. Patriot missile batteries were activated several times in the Iraqi War and were used extensively in the 1991 Gulf War. Williams spent time in Panama learning jungle operations and was involved in several joint operation trainings with other branches of the military. William had 49 jumps from high-performance aircrafts and one from a Huey helicopter, which is a Vietnam-era helicopter. He had one jump mission during his time in Saudi Arabia, in which he earned his Saudi Arabia jump wings. William was trained in air assault and also had basic medical training known as Combat Lifesaver. He met his future bride, Cheryl, originally from Marshalltown, who went to the East Coast to become a nanny. The two met at church. They were married and were stationed in North Carolina. After William's honorable discharge from the Army, the couple moved to the Marshalltown area. William answered the employment ad in the Penny Saver and applied to be a jailer at the Marshall County Jailer. He was a jailer for 4 years and then applied for the position of deputy sheriff. He has worked for the deputy for the last 22 years, giving Marshall County 26 years of public service. In his position as deputy in Marshall County, William has responded to numerous situations, from cattle being out, car accidents, traffic stops, domestic disturbances, you name it. He has probably seen it in his 26 years of service. People often think that deputies and police officers who work in rural areas have it easy and don't face the same dangerous calls that law enforcement in urban areas do. This assumption could not be farther from the truth. While they may have less call volume, they face the same dangerous situations and often without backup or anyone being close. Deputy Parker has seen people in their happiest moments and in their darkest hours. The job of deputy requires split-second decision-making, problem-solving, and always remembering to treat people the way you want to be treated. Over the years, he's been careful and forthright in his decision-making. He has found that a calm voice and respect help in avoiding altercations. He tries not to think of the dangers of the job, but rather to focus on the service of helping people, making a difference, and doing the right thing. William and Cheryl have 2 children, Justin and Caitlin. Justin is a 2015 graduate of West Marshall. Justin went through the CNA program at MCC while in high school and has earned his BSN degree. Justin is an RN at Unity Point in Des Moines and is a critical care nurse. Caitlin is a senior at West Marshall and is involved in cheerleading. Caitlin also has been involved in the West Marshall Teacher Work Experience program and is a fan favorite of preschoolers. Caitlin is still figuring out her next step, but in the meantime is taking college classes and working hard to make the most of her senior year. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm round of applause to Mr. William Parker. Ronald Wilkie Sr. is a 1982 West Marshall graduate and has served his country for 28 years. 10 years of active duty and 18 years in the Iowa 132nd Air National Guard. During his time in the military, he has traveled the world and has served in Korea, Panama, Germany, England, Hawaii, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Japan, and of course in missions in the United States. Ron met his wife, Shelley, who is also a veteran. They met in Colorado Springs. Shelley served 3 years in the Army and is originally from Pennsylvania. In February of Ron's senior year, he enlisted in the Air Force. He left in July after he graduated and was stationed at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. He also trained in Chanute, Illinois, and stationed in Ogden, Utah. Ron was enlisted during the 80s. During that time, the United States was very concerned about the threats of nuclear war. At the time, President Reagan was building up the technology and training of troops, which is believed to have been the edge that the United States had during the Gulf War. The military training at this time involved chemical and nuclear warfare training. Ron will never forget the days going through the gas chamber wearing a gas mask and clearing his mask in the chamber and keeping in mind to take breaths at the right time so he wouldn't choke. During these training sessions, Ron had to wear a biological suit and gas mask for up to 24 hours. Since the Korean conflict almost over 70 years ago, there has been American military bases in Korea. With close to 30,000 American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines in South Korea, United States forces in Korea are a major presence in the region and a key manifestation of the U.S. government's aim to rebalance towards the Asia-Pacific. Ron's first taste of Korea was a monsoon for 5 straight days. The open sewer ditches were flooded, and that young guy from Marshall County wasn't sure what he had signed up for. Ron spent a year in Osan, Korea for a year. The weather in Korea is a lot like Iowa weather, bitterly cold in the winter and very hot and humid in the summer. South Korea is an ally to the United States, and Ron remembers the people as being friendly. It is important to note that South Korea is an ally to the United States and that North Korea poses a great threat to the United States. In fact, North Korea has been a central concern of presidential debates in the last year dealing with national security. North Korea poses a great threat to the national security of the United States. The United States presence in South Korea always has been important, but today the military bases there are crucial. During his time in Korea, Ron had a near-death experience while working with a rapid fuels response team. A U-2 landed in a ditch. The fuel that was left in the U-2 was being contained so that it wouldn't go into the river. The U-2 lit back up and caused a firewall. Ron was able to avert the danger, and he was thankful that he was able to avoid injury. After Ron finished his service in Korea, he went to Colorado Springs to Peterson Air Force Base. Ron was in a civil engineering unit, which was called Prime Beef, Primary Base Emergency Engineering Force. He was also an augmentee in Red Horse. Red Horse would build facilities, and Prime Beef would maintain and defend the structures. Civil engineering units build structures and have things in order before troops arrive. He was deployed several times while in Colorado Springs. While in Colorado Springs, Ron and Shelley were married and had 2 of their children while stationed there. Part of the lifestyle of active duty is missing out on important events such as the birth of a child, weddings, funerals, and other events that most of us take for granted. During his years of service, Ron and Shelley had 5 children. Ron has always been very appreciative of his wife's dedication and notes that it was really hard when he was deployed and his wife was at home with 5 children. At the end of his 10-year service, he was encouraged by Vietnam-era veterans to continue his career in the military in the Air National Guard. The Air National Guard is comprised of citizen airmen who train part-time close to home until called for duty. These professionals serve both in the federal and state governments, assisting their communities and helping the Air Force guard American skies. Ron and Shelley moved back to Iowa and settled in Ron's boyhood home. Ronald retired as an E7 Master's Sergeant. This rank is a very prestigious rank and is in the top 3 ranks of the Air Force. Ron has a son, Junior, who is a 2012 graduate of West Marshall, and he is here today. It was 30 years to the day when Junior signed his enlistment papers to join the military. Ronald Jr. plans on making a career in the military and is also married to an Army veteran. Ronald and his wife had their first child and are stationed in Omaha. He literally got home less than 14 days ago. Ronald Jr. has been deployed in Dubai when his second child, Elena, was born. Ronald Jr. just got back, and we're very glad that you're here today. Let's give Ronald a nice round of applause. Ron and Shelley have 4 daughters: Rachel, who teaches English to Chinese students; Brittany, who is an HR representative; Brandy, who has worked at Wells Fargo; and Mary, who is a senior at West Marshall. Mary is involved in volleyball, track, cheer, drama backstage, and is taking college classes. Mary is figuring out her choices and getting ready for the next step. And her dad wanted me to publicly proclaim that we should go to the military. Okay. But I don't know how Mary feels about that, but I publicly proclaim that. We are very honored to have Ron Wilkie Sr. here today. At this time, Ron works at Lennox as an industrial mechanic. Thank you, Ron, for your military service of 28 years. Our final honored guest is Eugene Pennegar. Eugene is the grandparent of Blake and Raven Pennegar. Gene is here today not to be honored, but he is here for his grandchildren. You see, Gene is a very humble person who wished to have his military life be something that is private and in the past. However, this day was important to Blake and Raven, and he is here today for his grandchildren. Gene came from very humble beginnings in the foothills of D'Arc, Missouri. He was orphaned at the age of 4½. Gene had 4 siblings, and upon the death of his parents, the family of 5 children were split up. Gene lived with relatives, and after his stepmother died, his stepfather signed him up for the Army. He was just 17 years old. Gene never finished high school and started his Army career in Fort Larcherwood, Missouri. He was then sent to Georgia to be trained as a paratrooper. In those days, paratroopers were trained to jump out of aircraft to complete missions, and most of them ended up as door gunners. When I asked Gene how that happened, he told me that the Army looked for young people that didn't have much to leave behind, young soldiers that didn't have anything in the world. No family, no obligations. He was then sent to Dachau, Germany. He was on guard duty with the military police, and he hated the snow and the weather, and he was there for just 6 months. It was 1968. The United States was involved in the Vietnam conflict. Gene recalls that the weather was always humid and it rained all of the time. Not like it rains here, but with large raindrops that pounded off your skin. Between the humidity and the rain, the soldiers were always wet from sweat or from the weather. Their clothes were never dry, their socks were always wet. The mud never ended. The soldiers would bathe in the stream, and as they would emerge from their bath, they would be covered with leeches. Fighting in Vietnam was nothing like fighting in Europe during World War II. Dense jungles, mosquitoes, heat, and malaria made progress difficult. Enemy Viet Cong soldiers would hide in villages, attack, and disappear. Fields were full of booby traps and mines, and hundreds of miles of tunnels ran under villages, allowing enemy soldiers to escape quickly. Gene was also assigned to be a communications soldier, which meant that he carried a heavy radio on his back. This radio served as a communication to the units who were in the field. On the worst day of his life, another soldier in his platoon took the duty of carrying the radio. And that soldier was shot by enemy fire and never returned home. With Gene's paratrooper training, he was also tasked to be a door gunner. A door gunner was a very dangerous job. Door gunners were perched on the inside of a helicopter and operated a machine gun to ward off attacks of the helicopter. It was one of the worst jobs because beyond taking intense ground fire, helicopters swooped into the trees. If the pilot got too close to the treetops, the helicopter skid plates would flip upside down and the chopper would be a fireball. Nonetheless, Gene flew in the chopper almost every day, armed with an M60 and a 500-round drum magazine. Gene saw many devastating things in his year and a half in Vietnam, and as he reflects on his time, he feels that it was a complete waste. He also is thankful that today's media was not present. He feels that the media would have turned the war in a different direction. Gene also recalls the poor treatment that the soldiers returning home from Vietnam received. He returned to the United States and was called a baby killer. Garbage and food were thrown at him. He He was so troubled about this that he threw away his uniform. Even just a few years ago when he was working at M. Gurvich and Sons, a truck driver saw that he was a Vietnam veteran and asked him if he was a baby killer. A cruel and painful reminder of the treatment that not only Gene experienced, but countless Vietnam-era soldiers. When Gene's tour was up, he was stationed at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to train officers in communication and security decoding. Many officers were young college graduates who had no idea what they were about to see and command in Vietnam. During his service, Gene was awarded the Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Distinguished Service Medal, Vietnam Service Medal. Gene was also a rifle expert, which required a soldier to take 36 out of 40 shots. 2 overseas bars, Cambodia and Laos, and the country of Vietnam honored Gene along with 7 members of his 101 Airborne Platoon with a Silver Star. In his platoon of 7 soldiers, only 3 returned home. Gene returned home to do the only thing that he knew, and that was to work. He married Vivian, who really understood him and saw him through his struggles of civilian living. Vivian and Gene had 4 children, Robert, Daniel, Mike, and Heather. Gene started a photographer business in Fredericktown, Missouri. His business took school pictures at local schools. He then opened and managed a Sambo's restaurant in Marshalltown and St. Louis, Missouri. He put his everyday struggles aside and managed and worked. His restaurant in St. Louis was very popular, and celebrities such as Chubby Checkers and Chuck Berry would stop by for a meal. After the franchise shut down, Gene worked in Marshalltown in various supervisory roles. In 2004, Gene and Vivian bought property north of State Center, which was a little piece of heaven for the couple. Vivian passed away in 2004 from a quick cancer diagnosis. He says that Vivian was patient and kind and helped him tremendously. Today, Gene is married to Linda, and the couple enjoy raising their grandsons, Raven and Blake, who are seniors at West Marshall. They also have a granddaughter, Josh Warnell, who attends BCLUW. Gene is a very kind and generous and has been known to be a guardian angel for people in need. Gene is a great example of what hard work, attention to detail, and doing the right things accomplish. Ladies and gentlemen, please let us give a round of applause to Mr. Eugene Penegrin. And in conclusion, I also have one last shout out to my brother, Jim. Jim is in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Jim is a 6-year Marine veteran serving in Desert Storm. He's a graduate of Iowa State University and is at his job today as an international grain merchandiser in Baton Rouge. Semper Fi, brother. Semper Fi in Latin means always faithful, always loyal. I also want to thank Mrs. Fonz's first grade class for making the cute little soldiers that are donning our tables. And in closing, if we want to preserve our freedoms, we must put them into action. For example, by voting in elections or speaking out against injustices. We must also ensure that everyone feels the benefits of freedom. And we can do that by volunteering in our communities and making our part of the world a great place. Veterans Day isn't just a day for veterans. It's a day for all Americans. It's a day to remember why they were fighting and a day for us to reflect on the many freedoms that we take for granted. Thank you for honoring our veterans today, and for the people at home, thank you for tuning in. Ladies and gentlemen, a final round for our veterans. today, yesterday at noon, we were trying to figure out if we were going to have this and what this was going to look like after the governor's proclamation. And thank you for just sitting where you're supposed to be sitting. You know, the kids that are in high school right now, you folks have been so great and so positive. I'm so glad that we've been able to be in school thus far. And thank you for your time and attention. And go Veterans Day. To start having our seniors can now leave, so go ahead and leave. And you will report to your 6-hour classes. Okay, the juniors can leave. Sophomores?
Feel good?